Okay, thanks guys for coming to the Setting Healthy Boundaries workshop today. I appreciate you guys being here, especially after the spring break. I have Elizabeth Saunders here with me, so I will hand it off to you, Elizabeth, to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I don't know, I may go too quickly through this, but I guess you'll be glad for extra time if we don't take a whole hour. My name is Elizabeth Saunders. I am a licensed clinical social worker. And what that means is I am a therapist over here at the Wolfpack Wellness Counseling Center. So I have been a therapist for over 10 years. And I've been here on the CSU Pueblo campus for, after this May, it'll be 2 years. And I love the job that I do, and I love talking to people and teaching and sharing information and learning. And so I'm always excited to do these presentations. Today, today's topic is going to be around boundaries. And so I am going to get ready to share my screen. Also, yeah, I appreciate everyone being patient with me navigating technology. Let me make sure. I guess I could do it in presentation mode, but maybe we'll just do it like this. Could someone just unmute and say like, hey, I can see your screen? Anyone?
I can see your screen.
Oh, good, thank you. Okay, so we'll talk today about setting and maintaining boundaries. What I am curious about is, let's see, just before, I know sometimes with presentations like this, I do the same thing. You sort of maybe will end up multitasking, like you'll put it earbuded and do your own thing, which is great. But just before, while I have everyone's attention, around the topic of boundaries, so before we even jump into it, would anyone mind putting something in the chat? I'll give us 30 seconds, what you hear or think or feel when you hear about this topic, setting or maintaining boundaries. Just 1 or 2 words, a question that you might have about boundaries, something that you find really works for you around healthy boundaries, or yeah, something you hope I might address during this conversation. Here, I'll just open the chat. Love it. Self-care, great. Anyone else have anything that they think about when they hear the phrase boundaries? Self-care, protecting your peace. I love it. Any other questions people have, or maybe challenges you've had on this quest for self-care and seeking peace? Okay, we can see if, feel free to, I'll try to stay in touch with the chat. So if you think of anything as we're going along, please feel free to share. And we'll jump right into it. So our objectives today, I don't know if you guys can also see the chat. I was going to try to put it somewhere we can kind of keep an eye on it. Okay. So goals for today is, of course, to come up with maybe a working definition of what boundaries are. When people say, I want to have better boundaries or have healthy boundaries, that hopefully we're sharing some language about what that means. How we identify if we're needing to strengthen our boundaries. Signs that maybe we've entered a situation in which we are going to, as I'm reading these comments, say no or be more assertive, which is very challenging. There are ways on sort of an academic level that we talk about boundaries. So there are sort of 3 levels of boundaries that range from really porous, is the word that we use, all the way to very rigid. And so our goal is to find the middle ground, which is a nice balance. And then, yeah, to just kind of decrease some of the fear around them by reviewing how people might respond. And sometimes people don't respond well to us setting healthy boundaries, but that doesn't mean that they're not needed. And then 2 videos from 2 of my favorite women in this field. One is Nedra Glover Tawwab. She's got a beautiful book called Set Boundaries, Find Peace. If you have a chance to check it out from the library, I encourage it. we are also in the realm of, I share this a lot, when I was coming up through school, 15 years ago in my master's, and doing my therapy training, if I had recommended something on the internet to someone, other therapists probably would have like scowled and people would have been like, that's not a real resource. What I think is awesome in this post-COVID time, and just as technology abounds and continues to persist, there are some really cool voices on social media that I think can actually be really useful resources. And so she is one of them. She's a licensed therapist, but has a very active Instagram presence. And as with anything, it's good to be discerning. But I think in a field such as mental health and human behavior that tends to be old white males, I am always refreshed when we can celebrate people of color and diverse voices helping us have these conversations as well. So let me pop on a little talk from her just so we don't get sick of hearing me talk the whole time. And then let's see, feel free to speak up, unmute yourself and speak up if this doesn't come through.
Create healthier relationships. And let me tell you, I'm a therapist whose job it is to help people create healthier relationships. And let me tell you, it can be really hard to tell someone what you need. It takes a lot of courage to stand up and say, this is the way I want to be treated. Most of us aren't so great at vocalizing to the people in our lives what makes us feel respected and valued. It's true with friends, family, partners, and it's also true at work. You gotta set healthy boundaries. Boundaries can be an intimidating term, but they're very simply the expectations and needs that help us feel safe and comfortable in relationships. Work is the relationship we spend the most time in, and yet it's also the place where we have the hardest time setting limits. We're scared that people won't see us as a team player. Our employers have boundaries built in, like the time your workday begins and how many vacation days you can have. But work boundaries need to be a two-way street. Boundaries for your employer and boundaries for you. Setting them can help you feel happier and more fulfilled in your roles, not to mention less exhausted and overwhelmed at work. We often assume that other people have the same rules for life as we do. We think they can tell our preferences and know our feelings from our body language. But no one, not the people you've known for years, and certainly not your coworkers, can read your mind. You have to explicitly state what you need. Communicating what works for us is one of the kindest things we can do. The short-term discomfort is so worth it for the long-term ease of having healthier boundaries in the workplace. Here are 3 steps to help you get started. Step 1, identify the boundaries you need to set. There are so many different kinds. For example, you can tell a colleague what hours you are and aren't available to work. You can share that you need to leave the office promptly at 5 to pick up your children, or that you log off fully on the weekends to really recharge. You can tell them how you prefer to communicate, that you enjoy talking by phone rather than instant messaging or texting. Especially with your bosses, you can set boundaries around how you like feedback. You can say, I work best with clear deadlines. Can you please set one? Or you can tell them you like written notes on your work so you have time to digest the feedback. You can set boundaries on how you interact with people socially. For example, it makes me feel uncomfortable when you share gossip at my desk. Or, no, I'm not interested in drinks after work, but I'd love to go to a yoga class with you. You can even set boundaries around your calendar and ask that people ask you before throwing a meeting on it, as you prefer to be aware of what your day looks like. Step 2, think about how and when to make the statement. Boundaries are like classroom rules. You want to set them as early as possible. People do it all the time in the job seeking process. They may say something like, I have vacation planned for these dates. Will I be able to take my vacation? If we can go into a new work environment and with people already knowing what we can and can't do, that's a beautiful way to show up. If that feels like too much, orientation can be a great time to set boundaries. When your supervisor tells you the workday ends at 6, just flow it in. That's perfect. I need to leave work at 6. One boundary I want you to set right away is to take every single day of paid vacation. You've earned it, you need the rest, and recharging is good for work-life balance. And by the way, it's perfectly acceptable to set boundaries for yourself when you notice something in the workday isn't making you feel good. So if you get a headache when you have 5 meetings in a day, tell yourself that 4 will be your maximum. If you get anxious trying to respond to 200 emails on Monday morning, don't do that first thing. Break it up in half-hour increments throughout the day. I have a set of boundaries around my work. For me, I like working in 30-minute chunks. I don't like answering every email as soon as I get it. I like sitting with the information before I respond. You have to set in motion those new habits and practices that will make you feel at ease. And now comes the most important part of the process. Step 3, you have to stick to the boundaries you set. If you say you're not available after 6, don't respond to the group chat. If you say you're not available on weekends, don't be available on weekends. When you respond to emails or agree to look at that proposal out of those bounds, you're teaching people that the boundary isn't real, that it's okay to violate it. Consistency is really key here. That might mean restating the boundary more than once. That might mean reminding yourself why you set the boundary in the first place. Setting boundaries is hard at first, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. Boundaries are contagious. Once you start to consistently implement them, others will too. You might be the inspiration that helps them set better boundaries. Even if they don't have the courage right now, it's now in the back of their mind.
The only thing I regret about my life was hiring local talent.
Oh my gosh.
If I knew about it.
Okay. Are y'all still with me? I think so. So here's what I'm actually going to do since I have this open is I'm just going to add, let's see, a new slide. And because I love this video, I feel like what I want to talk about today is kind of just breaking down, this video so that it is in a bite-sized way that makes it make sense. Oh, whatever I'm doing is not that. But what I was thinking I would do is just take one of these text boxes and kind of brainstorm some things that I heard and to see what else people heard from this. So if you would type into the chat anything that you found particularly useful, interesting, challenging, while I try to figure out how we can just take a little brainstorm. So I'll start. The first thing that I really appreciated is, I say this to myself all the time, communication. This is just not, oh, you guys, this is amazing how terrible my PowerPoint skills are. Why are there boxes everywhere? Okay, it's not working. Let's just do it in the chat. Let me just delete this slide. We could just do it in the chat, or I'll say them out loud. Here are my takeaways. One is communication is kindness. I tell myself this all the time. If I'm about to have to set a boundary to someone, is I say, I am giving this person a gift. I'm giving them the gift of not being confused. I'm giving them the gift of knowing how to interact with me, how they can get the best version of me to interact back with them. I talk about this all the time. We teach other people how to treat us. And that is what asserting a boundary can feel like. I love the reminder that we often assume other people have the same rules as we do. So those are some of my favorite takeaways from this video. I also just want to point out too, yes, this was work specific, and the next slide is talking about, yes, people are not mind readers, and take your annual leave. Yes. These are really great reminders I give all the time in the counseling center as well. So again, while that video was primarily about work, the next slide talks about all the different areas in which boundaries apply. I just figured we wouldn't have time to jump into every one. And work is a good kind of generic way. As she mentioned, it's where we spend most of our time, kind of applies to the school environment as well. And I think can translate to family relationships, romantic relationships, friendships as well. Okay, so what are boundaries? They're expectations and needs that help us feel safe and comfortable in relationships. They're a gateway to healthy relationships. And it involves saying no to something in order to say yes to one of your own needs. Maybe it's an emotional, physical, or mental health need that should take priority. So types of boundaries include physical boundaries, right? I have 2 little kiddos, and this first part of their lives, we've talked about those type of boundaries a lot, when it's okay to touch another person, how we can use our voice to tell someone it's not okay to touch any part of ourselves if we don't want. Some of you all who might be parents, again, I'm so grateful to be a parent in this time period where we talk about these things. This involves, you know, if a grown-up asks for a hug when they're leaving your house, you have a right to say no to giving that person a hug, and so on and so forth, right? Intellectual boundaries. These are, this is a little more complex, but I feel like speaks to tolerating thoughts and ideas and creating environments in which we are respectful of holding multiple thoughts and ideas of others without people having us feel unsafe and without causing others to feel unsafe. Emotional boundaries, how I think about this a lot, the sort of pop culture term these days is trauma dumping, right? So emotional boundaries are asking for permission to share a difficult story. Emotional boundaries are, hey, do you have time to sit with me while I grieve? I just got some sad news and I'm hoping you can sit and listen to me share about this really hard time I'm going through. Sexual boundaries, of course, are the next level of physical boundaries. Developing our body safe boundaries, material boundaries, things like money. So how do we create values around being able to set limits with money and our things? This ties back into a little note I made during the video, where I think at a different time in my life, I might have heard that video where she mentions it's okay to set boundaries at work. And I just want to call out that that is a privilege. There are a lot of times in our life where we are stuck with a job that maybe is not respectful of our boundaries, but it's kind of the job we need, and fear of retaliation or getting fired are sometimes very real. And so I just want to call out that even though these are an ultimate place to get to, I think if we don't have backup from society or workplaces, I just, of course, understand that they can be really hard to enforce. And that might be the case. I find that the case in setting material boundaries. We all grow up in a lot of different family systems, and there may be expectations about contributing financially to our family of origin. And that no longer becomes sustainable, but it can feel really difficult. Like we're sometimes balancing a boundary against a family value. And so that tends to fall under these material boundaries. And then time boundaries. Maybe we can all relate to that person who sees you at your desk or who sees you at your work, or who catches you on the phone, or a neighbor who sees you outside, and you're giving all of the signs that you are in a rush and need to go, and they just do not seem to recognize the same time boundaries as you. So I appreciate that one being mentioned as well. Okay, I'll just take a pause. Is anyone feeling the need to unmute and share or to comment on anything in the chat? Excellent. So I don't have you all on my screen, so don't use the hand raise button, just unmute and shout something at me if you think of it, because I can't see. Okay, so this is again just reiterating some of the above bullet points, but the meaning of boundaries, and these are all things you shared in the chat as well. They are a way for us to safeguard overextending ourselves. It is a self-care practice. It is a form of communicating what our expectations are of how other people can interact with us. They set expectations for others for getting to be in relationship with us. A way to communicate, a way to foster healthy relationships, be clear, and ultimately for people to feel safe. So this is really helpful. I think sometimes being a human, an emotion will come first and we don't necessarily know why. So for me, I find that I am needing more rigid boundaries when I start feeling really short with people. I hear myself, if people say, hey, how are you? My response is defaulting to, oh, I'm okay, I guess. I feel myself being resentful when people are asking me to do things that normally are part of my job expectation, that normally I enjoy doing. So if you follow these bullet points, when you start to feel really overwhelmed, it might feel like racing thoughts. It might feel like not enough time. It's that feeling of resentment. So it's that fifth ask of the day from someone that just has you saying, gosh, all I do is stuff for other people, or this, all people do is come to me for help, right? The next step to that is then avoiding all of it. So not even being able to pick up the phone, or avoiding people out of fear that they're going to ask you to do something. Finding yourself, things have to get out of the boiling pot somehow. So we find ourselves slipping comments in places. We're feeling tired all the time. Intensifying even more, it can be a feeling of wanting to escape, or at its worst, it's feelings of just like wanting to disappear, right? So right now, if you're listening along or have a notebook nearby, maybe just do a quick little body scan and see if these feelings are cropping up in any of your current situations. Maybe it's a group project at school, maybe it's with your spouse, maybe it's with a family member or neighbor. Are you noticing any of these things coming up? So here's where I'll go from this. I found that in my journey with boundaries, and in fairness, I didn't have the language probably for healthy boundaries until 15 years ago when I went to school. I would have all these feelings, but I found myself, I really had to go through a journey, because I think boundaries can sometimes feel like making that assumption that people should be able to see this coming from us. They should be able to tell that we look overwhelmed. They should be able to tell that we seem tired. They should know that they've asked us 8 times for a favor and we've not asked for one back. And so I found myself going through this journey sort of saying, well, they should just know, why is it up to me to set a boundary? Why do I have to do the hard work of being assertive if they're the ones violating my boundaries? And so if you're in that stage of change, know that it's super common. And I think it can be a needed stage to go through. We just don't want to linger there too long, because the stage after that is discovering what we do have control over. And unfortunately, we don't have control over other people. But the way that we can navigate that is being really explicit and clear. And as she said in the film, following through when we say, oh, sorry, I don't lend people money. It's just a blanket rule. And then if they ask again, being assertive and saying, oh, we already talked about that. That's just something I don't do. And we may have to say it a few times, but eventually it will stick. So it's not giving in to those urges, even if we feel like they keep asking and they should know by now. Okay, so the 3 levels of boundaries that we talk about kind of operate on a spectrum. So the most open level of boundaries is what we refer to as porous boundaries. You might be able to think of that person in your life who really overshares. And sometimes that can, you know, in an appropriate relationship, some of these things can happen to some extent, and it's kind of part of a relationship. It's when it really starts to not be an agreed upon interaction and it's really unequal. It is not going in both directions. So it's really oversharing things that should be kept private. It's sort of codependency and enmeshment. So it's people not even being able to make their own decisions without feeling they have to check in on the other person or be responsible for the other person's emotions. It can mean you have the word no flashing in your brain, but you're unable to verbalize it. It's again, here's another phrase I would have typed in if we had a whiteboard, which is, I have people practice this a lot in therapy, which is adults are able to be responsible for their own emotions. And so that's where this people pleasing is. I think we often don't want to set a boundary because we say, well, I don't want to make that person angry. If I counter that voice that says that with, well, an adult can be responsible for the feeling of anger and learn new skills for coping with anger, then it reminds me that it's that other person's job to then be responsible for managing their anger. And it's not my job to have to say yes to something to just make it so that they don't ever have to learn a new way to deal with the emotion of anger, right? Let's see, anything else? Just sort of really feeling like taking it personally or making it feel personal can be very poor. So we do things just because we're afraid someone won't like us or they might exclude us from the group. Okay. On the other side of the spectrum are very rigid boundaries. So humans are social creatures. We do need each other. We evolved from clans and small communities. You know, it really does take interconnectedness for families to function and workplaces to function. And so this rigid also has its own set of challenges. This is where we've maybe been so damaged from relationships or harmed in them that we never feel safe sharing. We wall ourselves up and don't make ourselves vulnerable to anyone, anywhere, at any time. We might lose relationships. We might, instead of having a hard conversation, we might opt to completely cut out a relationship because the fear of what that hard conversation could look like is just so scary that we feel like the only choice is to include nobody. Rigid boundaries can sometimes evolve into us maybe expecting too much of other people. Our expectations get so high that we feel like if it's not completely in line with our own experience, that those people are not qualified to interact with us. So we call it a lot of black and white thinking in the therapy process too, or in the mental health field. So I was gonna see where so back up here, before I go to the healthy boundaries. So the signs that you need boundaries, we'll just maybe go through and look. So a feeling of overwhelm is that rigid or porous. If you feel like you want to type it in, or I'll just talk through all of these as you look through. Feeling overwhelmed might be a sign of well, I guess that one could go either way, right? Too porous of boundaries means we're just saying yes to everything and we're completely overwhelmed with too much to do. The feeling of overwhelm could be that our boundaries in some cases are too rigid, because we are absolutely refusing to ask for help from anybody, even someone who might be really qualified. The resentment can tend to come from too porous of boundaries. So feeling like, why does everyone always come to me? I have no choice but to help when we do. The avoidance that could be from too rigid, right? So we're so rigid that we're avoiding and not letting people in. So I guess, yeah, depending on the scenario, the rigid or porous can kind of come up in all of these. Feeling burnt out, not having time to yourself, right? So the whole point of the whole shebang, right? Healthy boundaries, the third level that I think we're all trying to attain, which is to be in a spot where we can let people know what our values are and feel really confident being clear about how we partition up our day. Maybe we commit a couple hours to family a day, a couple hours to a significant other, a couple hours to work, a couple hours to school, and a couple hours to our community. Healthy boundaries mean that we can tolerate our own opinion and others and hold both at the same time, right? It involves a level of vulnerability, but with only those who've earned our trust, right? So it's developing the skill of knowing, okay, who is a safe person that I can have more porous boundaries with, and who is an unsafe person who requires rigid boundaries. It's being able to discern which people are allowed to have us to what extent, right? It's growing the skill of being assertive and decisive and saying no. And along with that, right, boundaries are not a two-way street. I also find that sometimes when we're developing boundary skills, we get really confident with ours. And then if someone asserts one with us, we sort of have to reorganize as well. So we have to keep in mind that part of boundary practice is being aware of where we might have areas of opportunity to learn and grow our own discernment with respecting other people's boundaries. Okay. Any other, I'll stop jabbering for just a sec. Does anyone feel like sharing or is having any thoughts? All right. So I think, as I mentioned before, my language that I've used to set boundaries has really evolved over time. I think it depends on the person, how close our relationship with is. For example, my husband, you know, I've done this work for as long as we've been together, and he'll always say, "Are you trying to social work me right now?" But he knows that we share a common language for the word boundaries. So if I say like, "Oh, this is kind of like feeling like it's," you know, if he's asking me to help him with a project or change tasks around the house or something, I feel like he and I have a very different conversation where we have a level of trust and respect and shared vocabulary that allows me to be a little more direct. And I can say like, "Oh, that feels like a weird boundary thing for me. I'm going to have to think about it." Whereas with maybe someone who I know is going to catch me up in an argument, I have some family members who, if I even said the word boundary, they would get offended and it would be an opportunity to start a fight. So with them, I have to say something, you know, a little different. I might say, you know, if I'm expected to go to a family gathering, I might have to really do it via text so that someone can't catch me on the phone. I might have to not leave any opportunity for them to poke holes in my boundary and just say a clear no, right? So I encourage you after today or listening to this to kind of think about or feel the freedom to know that you can develop boundary language that's specific to you and that feels comfortable to you. Every phrase might not be for everyone. So these are just some examples. I really like the second one. Thank you for thinking of me. I have something else planned and I'm not going to be able to attend. This third one I really find speaks to when I get in the mindset of me communicating kindness and teaching people how they can best interact with me. So this one helps. I love helping with family, but I'm going to need at least a day of advance notice if you need me to babysit. And then I might tack on, it's just going to help me be more present and less stressed as I'm caring for your child, right? So again, just some brainstorms. Everyone's are going to be different, and it comes with practice and developing what feels right for you. I do want to give an opportunity to just share about why this process can be so difficult. It can feel really difficult when you say, let's see. So something like, I need advance time before you drop my kids off, or before you drop your kids off at my house to watch them. Someone might say, well, I would like that too, but I'm not making you give me a call the day before, right? So a counter to that, I think, can be, that's absolutely fine. We can experience this in different ways. And I'm not asking you right now to do that for me, but I am asking, or for me to do that for you. Right? So it's okay for people to have different boundaries too. And that might be something that when there's pushback, you say like, yeah, I can super appreciate that we would do things in different ways. And if there ever is a change that I can make, I'm open to it, right? Limit testing can be like someone, it's kind of like that repeat, right? Of them pushing and pushing, like maybe if they ask you a third time, you'll give in the third time, and the importance of reinforcing every single time. And not giving in, because the second you give in, then they learn, okay, if I ask 7 times, they give in on the 8th, right? People doing what they want despite your boundaries. And that's the hard one, because it means then we have to firm up even more. So it's sort of the, we always want to give the threat without actually having to follow through on it. So it might be something like, hey, if this happens again, we're not going to be able to do this anymore. But maybe the thing is fun and it will bum you out. So if they ignore it, though, it really means we have to say like, okay, I really have to follow through on whatever the thing is that I said we would go away if they can't respect my boundaries. This rationalizing and questioning, when people question like, why do we have to do this different? What's the point? I don't understand why now and not again. I really want to discourage you to like not get wrapped up in this. It's bargaining, and it generally, unless it's coming from a real legitimate place, you don't have an obligation to follow through on these questions. It can be because it's what I need right now for my health. That could be a fine one. Or, yeah, I get your confusion, but this is what I've decided right now, right? So I just, sometimes those questions are not helpful to feel like you have to answer. We can hold a little of defensiveness for someone. Sometimes they'll violate our boundaries over and over, and they get defensive by explaining why this was the exception. We don't want to get lost in that. People might ghost us. They might give us the silent treatment. Here's what my best advice too is on these. When you're setting a healthy boundary that you know is not hurting anyone and ultimately is going to benefit your mental health, it's all about our self-talk as these things are getting thrown to us. So I like to preload with, I will be okay if this person is angry with me. I can tolerate them being angry with me. And then building up some coping strategies to do, whether it's for an hour or an evening or a day or a week while they be angry, is just to really be strong and reinforce that you can tolerate people being angry or disappointed in you. Okay. These are just like hot tips for ourselves, right? Because as it goes, it is a two-way street, and we can know what our boundaries are, but it's really good for us to practice and notice where we might also be taking advantage of someone else's boundaries, and adjusting. And or this is just a good validating way. Sometimes we might know there's a boundary we need to set, but we feel in our minds, because of whatever system it's in, that it might be disrespectful or wrong. And so it is okay to not answer someone's repeated calls. It's okay to not return a phone call right away. You're allowed to ask for that boundary. And it's a good thing for us to practice in this instant gratification world. It's good to practice someone not returning your call right away as well. This one, the hardest one, allowing someone to be upset without trying to make them get over it or fix it. Adults can tolerate hard emotions, or they can learn to tolerate hard emotions. Practice accepting no as someone's final answer. Giving people space when they've demonstrated that's what they need or want. Trying really, to find that middle ground if someone has said they would not like to do something some way, and finding ways where we can practice being more flexible as well. Okay, here's one final video. So Brene Brown, also very trendy. She has her doctorate in social work and bases a lot of her boundaries work on actual data. So she collects data and produces research on human behavior. And so I will share this last little video with you from her.
Boundaries, I'm going to be honest with you, are not my forte. Brene, how is giving less of your time considered generous? Because how do I sell that to people is my question.
Okay, so this is the weirdest part of our research. So early on, maybe 10 years in, I had this stack of data and I was like, these are the most compassionate people I've ever come across. I mean, we were interviewing like monks. We were interviewing really compassionate people. And so we asked ourselves, what do these folks have in common? And I mean, we're talking about close to 500,000 pieces of data over 20 years now. And we're like, and I thought the answer was going to be spirituality, like compassionate people have spirituality in common. But I was wrong. The answer is the most compassionate people that we have interviewed and studied over the last 20 years are the most boundaried. And so what I've learned is that boundaries are not, as someone who studies vulnerability, I would say boundaries are not a wall or a moat around your heart. They are the path to self-respect. Boundaries are saying that I choose self-love and self-respect over what you think of me or the possibility of disappointing you. And how this ties to generosity in the research is really interesting. And here's the thing. We're not generous and kind to people who are walking all over us.
Well, I think I found the shorter version. That's okay. Oh, now I have to figure out how to exit. All right, so I love that. What she says in another talk is the most compassionate people are the most boundaried people. Okay, so again, some good practical things to take away from today. If you've been thinking, man, I was noticing some of those signs earlier in my relationships, how do I even get started, right? So create a mantra. There have been a couple different nuggets today that I hope I've shared either verbally or from these two videos. Something to hold on to during the awkward moment when your ask or your boundary is hanging in the air. So to just sort of let in your mind go, I'm choosing discomfort over resentment. I'm choosing discomfort in this moment over long-term resentment. Or I've given this person a gift to learn how to interact with me. Keep a little journal, write it down so you can identify those signs of when you're feeling resentful, overwhelmed, and tired. And again, we can spend a little time saying like, this person's such a jerk for taking advantage of me. But then once we realize like, well, this person is who they are, they're showing me who they are, what do I have control over? I can determine that I only stay on the phone with them for 5-minute increments, and then I come up with something to do so that I have to hang up and don't have to hear their negativity anymore. And then practice. I practice on my own. I practice in my car. I practice setting little boundaries with safe people. Maybe your friend who is super understanding, their feelings never get hurt. Practice just, even if you could go to lunch with them one day, practice saying like, oh, I can't go to lunch with you today, just as a way to say like, oh, I did that and it wasn't scary. So that then when you do have to do it with the scarier people, you at least have some practice under your belt. Okay, this is really it. Does anyone want to share anything? Any last thoughts or comments? Things you want to say? Oops. All right. The final thing is I love having these conversations. I love practicing them here in the counseling center. So as students, of course, take advantage of this service that's here on campus. This is the contact information for the counseling center, generally Mondays through Fridays from 8 to 5. Here in the Center for Health and Human Inquiry on the first floor, right next door to the Health and Wellness Center. Our phone number, this is something maybe not everyone knows. After our office closes from 5 p.m. overnight to 8 a.m. Is still staffed by licensed therapists. So we contract with them to be an on-call service. It doesn't necessarily, everyone's like, well, what qualifies as a crisis? If you need someone to talk to after hours, give them a call. We don't need to wait for everything to become a 10 before we ask for support sometimes. So feel free to use that number if ever helpful. And I can share this PowerPoint with Brian. All right, I guess that's it.
Thank you so much for coming and putting this presentation on. I found it really helpful.
Good, yeah, I hope so. I hope everyone took a little nugget away.